Howdy. I'm Robert McKay, of course. Well, it's become a habit. I'll mention that it's whiskey for beginners, although surely you know that by now. Just as surely as you know it's a thoroughly amateur production. You didn't need a title card to tell you that. You just look at the video and you know. I am going to try to keep the extraneous stuff out of the video tonight. I say tonight, I'm recording at 01:29 on Saturday morning the 8th. Can't quite read the calendar on the wall. Whatever it is. But to me it's night because I got off work at 2300. That's 1:29 in the morning and 11 at night. So to me it's still tonight. I have a simple question and answer as the premise of this video, but the simple answer has several parts, and so I want to keep the extraneous stuff out if I can, to a minimum if that's all I can do. And so I'll start right in and pour what Popcorn Sutton called some whiskey. When using a Glencairn, you pour it to the thickest part of the glass, and because of the tilt of the phone, so it can get me properly, it doesn't show. I'm going to try something. That hopefully gave you a level look at where you should not fill the glass past. You fill it all the way to the top, you've got way too much. It's not designed for that. The whiskey tonight is from the Bardstown Bourbon Company. I don't know what it is about their bottles. I hate the look of the bottles. This is the Origin Series Kentucky Straight Wheated Bourbon Whiskey. And what exactly the Origin Series means, I don't know. They have an Origin Series, they have a Discovery Series, they have various things. But this is a wheated bourbon. The mash bill is 53% corn, so it's really a barely legal bourbon. 39% wheat, it's a high wheat bourbon. And 8% sprouted barley. This is good stuff. I like it. I don't like the bottle. I don't like the label. I don't know what it is. I've tried to figure out why I don't like them. I can't. But I like the whiskey. Oh, that has got such a nice, sweet, spicy, sugary nose to it. Caramel is the one specific note that I got off that sniff. Tonight, I have notes, which I will consult. The question that is the basis of the video, and by the way, this is number 32, if you're keeping count. Obviously, it's in the title of the video. The question is, what are some broad categories of whiskey? I say broad because the more specific we get, the greater proliferation we get, and we could be here all year and maybe get done. But what are some broad categories of whiskey? I think there's some brown sugar and cinnamon in there, and these are all basic, cinnamon or bourbon notes. There are some people who say whiskey has a broad profile and bourbon has a narrow profile, but within that narrow profile, you have room for a lot of variation. Yeast strain, mash bill, size of barrels, where the barrels are in the rick house, where the rick house is, the orientation to the prevailing wind, the climate. All this can provide infinite variation almost within that supposedly narrow range. And I think that's one of the neat things about bourbon, is how with a mash bill that must be at least 51% corn, must be from the United States, must age in a charred oak barrel, new charred oak barrel, there is still so much room for variation. There's some extraneous stuff that I was going to try to keep out. But where I was going with that is, though you get the same basic things usually from bourbon, those basic things have their own variations. It's like you have X number of pipes in an organ, but by doing different things with the keyboard and the footboard, you can get so much variety of sound from it. So, what are some broad categories of whiskey? The first one I want to go by is grain. You can categorize a whiskey by the main grain that it's made out of, the dominant grain. And to be the main or dominant grain, it's going to have to be at least 51%. Otherwise, another grain could be, if it's only 50%, another grain could also be 50%, and neither dominates. So if you have a whiskey that is at least 51% of one grain, it'll go in that category. So there's corn whiskey. Bourbon is, in this categorization, a corn whiskey, because by American law it must be at least 51% corn. It's almost like eating caramel candy that has a little bit of red pepper mixed in with the candy. You can do this with various grains. There's corn, there's rye. If it's at least 51% rye, it's a rye whiskey. If it's at least 51% barley, it's a barley whiskey. Same with oats, same with rice, same with name a grain, and you can have that. Now, some grains rarely, if ever, are the dominant grain. As far as I know, and I could be wrong, as far as I know, the only distillery making rice whiskey is J.T. Mellick down in Louisiana. And I would love to have some of their whiskey, but I've not seen any here. But I would like to know what a rice whiskey tastes like. I have heard of oat whiskey. I've never seen any. But you can make whiskey out of oats, and it's often puzzled me, given the Scottish climate where oats is what grows best, why they didn't wind up making Scottish whiskey out of oats instead of barley. But of course, Scottish whiskey and Irish whiskey begin with barley. To this day, the epitome of Scottish or Irish whiskey is a 100% barley mash bill. But you can take any grain, and as long as it's at least 51%, it's that whiskey, whether corn, rye, oats, wheat, and there is wheat whiskey, whatever it is. And to make sure I'm not repeating myself over and over again in a redundantly repetitious manner, let me cross that off. Then there's the national categorization. Bourbon is an American whiskey. It is a distinctively American whiskey. It was invented in the United States. It's tempting to say it was invented in Kentucky, but there are a lot of factors, including journeys down the Mississippi River and people in New Orleans and the parts around there, which go into the story of how bourbon came to be. So Kentucky had a large part, I would say the largest part, although I'm not a historian of whiskey or anything else, but it's not just Kentucky that gave us bourbon. Tennessee whiskey is, and if you want to fight me about this, tough toenails, I won't fight. I'll always be willing to explain myself, to explain why I say what I say, but I'm not going to fight you about it. It ain't worth it. Tennessee whiskey is a variety of bourbon, as wheated bourbon is a variety of bourbon, as finished bourbon is a variety of bourbon, and so Tennessee had a large role also in developing what we know today as bourbon whiskey. And by the way, to paraphrase Richard Patterson, who was the master blender for White and Mackay in Glasgow, Scotland, if you ask what's the difference between bourbon and whiskey, I'll have to kill you, because bourbon is whiskey. What did the label say here? I don't think you're going to be able to read it. Wheated bourbon whiskey. The difference between bourbon and whiskey is exactly the same difference as the difference between Scotch and whiskey. It's exactly the same difference as the difference between a Ford and a motor vehicle. So, national origin. American whiskey, primarily bourbon, because it was invented in the United States. But any whiskey made in the United States is, by a definition, American whiskey, whether it's rye, corn whiskey, rice whiskey, blended whiskey, what have you. There's Scottish whiskey. Now, the Scots do not call it Scotch. Scotch is an English word, not a Scottish one. It's from England. It's the word the English have long used to speak of the Scots. S-C-O-T-S, Scots. I would presume it's a mispronunciation or something of Scots. The Scots call themselves Scots or Scottish, not Scotch. They call the whiskey they make whiskey, or maybe malt, because the bulk of it has at least some sprouted barley, malted barley, or malt in it. And of course there's the Scottish single malt. No, it's not single malt. It's single malt. It's not bourbon whiskey, it's bourbon whiskey. I'm not wearing black glasses. I'm wearing black glasses. This is not my left hand, it's my left hand. It's not single malt, it's single malt. If you're going to use British terminology, but that's the mainstay of Scottish and Irish whiskey. That's what the best of it is that 100% barley mash bill from one distillery. There's Indian whiskey. The only Indian whiskey I've had was a sample of Paul John Nirvana, and that one sample determined me that someday I'll buy my own bottle. Total Wine used to have it over here, but I wasn't in a mood for barley whiskey. Once I was in the mood for barley whiskey, guess what? It was out of stock. And it's been out of stock for a while. And Kelly Liquors doesn't have it. So it'll be a while, I guess, before I have a bottle of it after all. But you can have whiskey from various places. They make whiskey in Germany. They make whiskey in Australia. Japan has a big whiskey industry. Mexico makes whiskey. One of the bottles I have on hand right now is Abasolo from el Estado de Mexico en el País de Mexico. From the state of Mexico in the country of Mexico. I can't talk fast until I go to speak Spanish, and then for some reason my mouth will move that fast. It don't do it in English. Then the third basic broad category of whiskey that I want to talk about, and where am I on time? I'm moving faster than I thought. I'm keeping more extraneous stuff out than I realized. The third basic category is strength, the proof of the whiskey. You can have low proof, medium proof, or high proof. Now, when I was just starting, this is good stuff. Some people don't like wheated bourbon. I've found that some wheated bourbon I don't like, some I do. Whereas most traditional bourbon that I've had, I like. It's about half and half for me with wheated bourbon. But when I was first starting out, I asked in a couple of 3 groups on MeWe, what are the definitions of low, medium, and high proof? Well, I got various answers. And like so much else about whiskey, it is somewhat subjective. There is no legal definition. And you don't find on bottles that this is low proof or medium proof or high proof. So for me, just on the fly saying this, I might say something different tomorrow. I would say low proof is from 80 up to 100. Medium is from 100 up to 120. So far, those are jumps of 20 proof points. And then high proof would be 120 on up. Now, as I say, it's subjective. If you're brand new to whiskey, and those of you who might be watching who have been drinking whiskey for 2,900 years, you need to understand that the whole point of this channel, and especially of the Whisky Basics playlist, is to provide information to beginners in whiskey, which I could not find all in one place when I was just starting out. So if I'm being too basic for you, I'm sorry, but my audience is that particular niche, the beginners in whiskey. And if you enjoy it anyway, well, great, fine, I'm happy. I'm terribly happy. Terribly happy? I'm not sure that's the right adjective. Or would it be an adverb in this case? I'm not sure. I speak good English. You can't tell it right now, but I speak good English when it's appropriate, but I do it in the same way I walk. I can't tell you what bones and muscles and tendons are involved in taking a single step. Equally, I cannot tell you what parts of speech are involved in constructing a sentence. I walk just because I know how to walk. I use English properly when appropriate. You might think this would be an appropriate venue, but it's my channel. I'm the sheriff around here. I do things my way. So I don't know if in in the phrase terribly happy, what part of speech happy is. Depending on what that is, terribly might be an adverb or an adjective. Anyway, so if you're not new to whiskey, I'm happy if you're enjoying the video, but my intended audience is the newbies. And to a newbie, 80 proof might be high. If, let's say for instance, you've been drinking beer all your life. The most alcohol you're liable to get in a beer is 10 or 12%. The minimum legal proof of whiskey is 80 proof, or 40%, about 4 times the alcohol that you'll get in beer. And not all beer is going to be 10, 12%. I don't know how it is now, but when I lived in Oklahoma, by law, beer could be no more than 3.2% alcohol. They sold cough medicine that was 3 or 4 times that alcohol content right over the counter. As I say, I don't know how things are now. I haven't lived in Oklahoma since the summer of 1997. So if you're new to whiskey, 80 proof might be high for you. As you get more into it, you'll probably find that your ability to drink higher proof whiskey increases. Although there are still some people been drinking whiskey for years and still prefer it in the 80 to 90 proof range. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you like, then that's what you should opt to drink. If you like it, it's good whiskey. That's what Mike Honcho told me about 4 years ago in the whiskey group on MeWe. Good advice. But those categories that I gave you, 80 to 100 for low, 100 to 120 for medium, 120 on up for high, those are good working categories until and unless you decide to come up with your own. Now, as much extraneous material as I was able to keep out, I'm still at 22 minutes, which is not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but I am going to end the video here. I've covered what I wanted to. I don't want to make it too long for you. So, let's see, what have I not used lately? The old, my brain went blank. It tried to go in 2 directions at once, and it can barely go in one. We'll give you the Spanish toast. Salud.